I'm here with saxophonist and composer and educator Bobby Selvaggio, who is bringing his long-term but not widely recorded Red Rhinoceros octet for a record release concert at Kent State University on Friday, April 3rd. We're going to talk about that project and about the rhinos. Bobby, thank you for being here on a snowy February morning.
Yeah, John, thank you. Yeah, it's we get used to that 50 plus degree weather and now of course the snow's come back. Yay.
Yeah, false spring for sure. So, this is a project, the Red Rhinoceros Octet, that has a very long history, like 20 years or so.
Yeah.
And then the rhino went extinct, but somehow you resuscitated the DNA and Jurassic Park style, reconstituted the band. It's had several iterations. Tell me the story of this band, why you formed it, and the music that you wrote for it, and how it's changed over time.
Yeah, boy, that's so it goes way back. So when my wife and I moved back from New York City, um I had been doing a lot of writing in New York, but not really, and gigs, and I was, playing gigs as a side person. I was putting together some of my own things, but I hadn't really been a real band leader at that point. And so when I came back from New York and I was just, kind of getting back into the scene, I wanted to really focus on writing new music and original new music, things that I was hearing in New York and things that I was hearing. And um, honestly, I just, as I was thinking about what type of group that I want, and octet just came to mind. I had played in a couple different octet nonettes in New York, and I just really liked that size. And so, I figured for kind of my first major project, an octet would be fun, give me a little bit to not just compose for, but arrange for, and kind of get into the compositional process a little bit. And so that's really just why the size of the group came about. I've just been telling this story lately to people because they're all like, Red Rhinoceros, it's kind of a cool name, but like, why? Where did that come from? And, people, if people remember, like in New York in the 90s, that was kind of a thing back then, is that jazz musicians were trying to think of ways to just add to the excitement and promotion of what they were doing with their groups, and bring elements of what was working from a promotional standpoint with like pop groups and rock groups, which is like come up with cool little weird names that you could use as promotion. And when I came back, Red Rhinoceros is just something that just hit me one day for no reason other than it kind of popped into my head and it stayed there and I liked it. And so, you know, um, that was kind of the first thing, is just finding a group, a size to write for. And then, you know, the other key was then finding musicians to play in that band, and musicians that were listening to that music of the day, which was really at that point kind of late 90s, early 2000s, and um, that really understood how that music was, because I was really trying to write things that were relevant to that time period. And I was very fortunate that there were some really great musicians in town. One of them, a young college student named Sean Jones, that was a student at Youngstown University, and he was recommended to me by a couple local musicians. And that's when I first met Sean, and realized at that moment that I could write anything I wanted for trumpet and he could play it. And so I just was able to put a band together of musicians that could really play modern jazz music of that day, that had everything from swing to Brazilian claves to funk to rock to, every style that you could think of. And that's kind of the beginning of that group and where it came from.
Yeah, it's pretty luxury casting to be able to grab a college student and have him turn out to be Sean Jones. But that was, 20 or 25 years ago. And
Hmm.
the band went into maybe hibernation for a long time. So that original version of the band, tell us who was in it and how long that lasted.
Yeah, so uh, the original band um, was I had five horns, myself, Sean Jones, a lot of musicians that most don't live in town anymore. Trombonist Mark Malden, who I went to school with. Mark is now the high school band director at Solon High School, and then Kenny Anderson, who's a great tenor saxophonist. Kenny had played with Arturo Sandoval. He actually had toured with Gloria Estefan and the Miami Sound Machine, a great tenor player, and then this great baritone saxophonist that was a great bass clarinetist too, Chris Carlick, who's been in New York City for many years. And in the rhythm section, the original rhythm section was Mark Gonder on drums and Kurt Felgemacher on bass and Dave Heeman on guitar. And that band, we really took off. So it was really integrated in with the bop stop scene at that time. So when I moved back from New York, the bop stop was at its second location, which was West Sixth, the warehouse district there, and there was a group that Jack Shantz had that he called his the Jack Shantz Jazz Unit, and they were playing Monday nights, and we worked it out where for almost a couple years we were alternating Monday nights at the bop stop, and so that really kind of changed at that time the trajectory of that group, my Red Rhinoceros octet, because we were for almost a couple years playing every other Monday, and I was writing new music all the time so it kind of allowed me to write music and knew that it was going to be played. And that was kind of the scene there for a while. Man, we would get good crowds out, a lot of young people, a lot of students would come out, and we were writing. I was writing constantly for that group. Everybody was playing at a really high level. And to be honest, after that time period, some of the musicians started leaving town. Sean ended up leaving town to go get his master's. Both Kenny and Chris Carlick left town, and Dave Heeman, the guitarist, left town. And the original group just kind of started to change. And there are wonderful musicians in town, but to really have the right type of musicians play original music of that time period, it was a little thin in town. So it made it difficult to have a working octet after that kind of couple 3 years of really working with that group. And to be honest with you, I was starting to write for other projects, and so that was the kind of the history of where the group came from, and why it kind of went away for a while. And then as I just started working on new groups, I just really didn't go back to it for a long time.
But you had a large book of compositions that you had to write for this regular gig at the old Bob
Oh
Stop.
yeah,
So a big book of compositions, nobody to play it, obviously no recordings. So here
yeah,
you are a quarter of a century later making
yeah.
a debut recording. So tell me how that came about, why you decided that now was the time to reconstitute a new group of rhinos and document the music.
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. And the last thing you said is really the reason, is simply to document that music. I've been very fortunate to compose a lot of music, put out a lot of records, create a lot of different projects with a lot of different local and national musicians. And I've always come from the school of thought, mostly from people that I've worked with or musicians that I've played with through the years from all around the country. and the importance of documenting music. And I've been thinking about it lately. I actually probably have about 4 projects right now that I could record. And the reality of it was, as I just was thinking about, what do I want to record next? That octet kept coming to mind. That, man, I have this music that people keep talking about, and some of the musicians that I've worked with and have known for years, like Chris Coles, for example. Excuse me. Chris and I get together all the time, and every now and then when we're talking, he'll talk about, oh man, I remember when one of the first jazz gigs I saw was your octet. And every now and then musicians will talk about that group, and it's like, where's the recording? Where's the recorded music of that? And it's just, I had to kind of sit down and think, okay, I have to document this music. And I'm very fortunate that there are great musicians in town now that are diverse players that really understand a lot of different styles. And the timing just kind of came together with the kind of musicians that I work with and know. The fact that I really wanted to document that music, because the other thing to think about is, with all the writing I've done through the years, that was kind of the beginning of it for me. And even though I feel, and the comments and compliments I've gotten about this music is that it sounds like it was written today, it's still relevant today, that it was just time to document that time period for me as a composer, and to be able to do it in a way that how I look and perceive music today. So that was kind of how that came about.
And the musicians that you've chosen, this whole new crew, um, are, generally a generation younger than you, I think it's
Oh
safe to
yeah.
say, by and large. Whereas the first band were your contemporaries.
Yeah.
So, what do you notice, if anything, about the way that these younger players approach music, approach your music, that's different from the approach of the OG band?
Yeah. So, boy, that's a really good question. I think about the original group and the music I was writing is, um, that music was what was literally happening on that scene at that time. So I talk about this all the time, is that, that, and we've actually talked about this, is that 90s New York jazz scene was really important, actually. I think historically important in a way that still hasn't quite been touched on for many different reasons. When you think about the Roy Hargroves or the Brad Meldows or the Chris Potters, or that are basically my generation of musicians that were coming into their own in New York cities when clubs like Smalls was just opening, or the 55 bar was new, or the think about the band like the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra that I was very fortunate to sub in quite a bit. I mean, when you think about it, Mel Lewis had just passed. I, I think maybe 10 years before I went to New York. I mean, it was less, a decade or less than when I moved to New York, and all of those musicians that were coming together at that time, writing that kind of music. And the list can go on and on and on of musicians that a lot of people don't necessarily know that I was hanging out with. And, you know, so that band that I had here in Cleveland were all musicians that were listening to that music at that time period, that knew some of those musicians on the scene. So the way we approached that music back then was from literally how we were looking at jazz music at that time period. Now versus today, a lot like to your point, I end up playing with a lot of younger musicians because, you know, the reality of it is a lot of the younger musicians are the ones that are really listening to, not only listening to the jazz music of that time period all the way up through today, but actively playing it, actively composing in it. And, you know, which you really need to have a band play music the way that it, you know, authentically, I guess is the best way to put it. You know, but the other thing though is that the band that I have together today is they have all that history to kind of draw upon. And so it is, to me, it's actually really interesting to hear this band play the music today. And I don't necessarily feel like the music is approached or played or perceived differently per se. It's just an interesting context of how they look at that music today. And most of the musicians in the present band will say, boy, this music kind of sounds like how you write. And a lot of them have played in other projects of mine. And I don't know if there's a big difference other than, you know, to me, it's almost the same because they're the same age as the musicians I was playing with back then. The only person that's really older is me, you know, and so, you know, that's kind of how I really look at it. But to me, it's more that it's just different musicians. And I've always been a big fan of having different. I love playing with a lot of musicians, especially the local musicians and on the scene in Northeast Ohio. And I've been very fortunate to have been able to hire quite a bit. I actually love that. I love when I can have, you know, 3 or 4 different musicians on each instrument play my music, because quite honestly, it makes me hear it differently. It makes me play it differently. And the whole point of composing music, as far as I'm concerned, is you can write music for a certain person, but music, like art, should be perceived and experienced by different people because they're going to give you a different perception of how you looked at what you created. And so I love that. And so I've really been enjoying playing this music today with this band.
And you've got some players to the point of playing with a lot of different people, which you certainly do. You have some players in this band who are really, really great players, but whose names you don't see every week on Jim Sabo's gigging.
Yeah,
But they're really wonderful. So if you would, tell me a little bit, very briefly, about each of the folks in the band and why you chose them for this project.
absolutely. So starting with the rhythm section, the guitarist is a good friend of mine who has been up. He and his partner moved up from Columbus fairly recently, Zach Jones, and I've known Zach for a few years now, although he's still newer to the scene here in Northeast Ohio. Although all the jazz musicians are starting to know who Zach is, and he's a great player that really approaches music in such a unique way that I just love. He really utilizes sounds well, you know, pedals and different types of things like that. And his knowledge of music is very deep from a jazz perspective, from a traditional rock perspective, from all these different angles, and which actually, quite honestly, for me, fits really perfect in my music in general, whether it's, you know, this group or any other. And so that's why I love playing with Zach on guitar. And then the bassist, Kevin Martinez, is somebody that I've used through the years a ton. And he is another one who is, all these musicians, they're all great musicians first. And then they're all really great jazz musicians. Kevin's another one that he's a band leader in his own right. He has a great group called the Reclamation Band. And you know, he's a great writer himself. And he's another one that really approaches music from a very diverse standpoint, you know, jazz and Americana and all these different types of angles that I love when musicians approach music like that because, you know, to digress on jazz for 1 second and why I choose all these musicians is that jazz is the traditions of jazz are still relevant in what we play today, but like we draw from so many things, and you have to have musicians that not only listen to, but quite honestly have studied and played in all these other things. Because when you have musicians like that, the jazz music you're playing makes sense because they understand rock, funk, Americana, Brazilian, any other type of thing. And so that's why Kevin's great. My drummer, I've known since he was in college, Zaire Darden, and I've been playing with Zaire for quite a few years now. Zaire's one of my favorite people and one of my favorite musicians, and I use a lot of different people, but Zaire is kind of like my number one go-to when it comes to drums. Zaire is one of the better musicians I know. Like, he's somebody that can play anything, can read anything, can do anything, and he just is such a great musician and drummer, and I just love playing with Zaire. The horn players, the trumpet player was, I always look for trumpet first to go along with myself, because so much of, this isn't necessarily a large group, although I arranged this music like it's a larger group because it's some fairly integrated arrangements, as well as, they're not just head charts with some backgrounds. There's actually some pretty deep integrated arrangements. And so even though it's only 5 horns, I like the lead. It's not a lead trumpet part by any means, but the trumpet player is essential for this band. From what I said earlier, John, is that I wrote all this music for Sean Jones. I mean, how many people can play what Sean Jones plays? And that actually is part of the reason why this band took a hiatus, is that you write a part for one player, and who else can do it? And so I was very fortunate when a young Tommy Lehman moved back to town, because Tommy has turned into one of these types of players that can play anything. And so that's really, and I've been using Tommy. He plays in my 11-piece group. I do multiple small group things where Tommy plays in, and I've been playing with him since he moved back to town. So Tommy was my first trumpet player call. Although for this gig coming up, Tommy ended up not being able to do it, so Garrett Folger's going to play it, and Garrett's another young trumpet player that can play anything. And so I adore playing with Garrett also, so for the April 3rd gig coming up, so Garrett's going to play it. The trombone player is another young player, Zach Warren, who I've known since he was in high school. Zach is figuratively and close to literally being family, where my son Julian and Zach's sister Becca have been together as partners for like almost 7 years now. So, and they're close to getting married, and so so Zach is almost like family to me, and I love Zach, and he is one of the monster trombone players today. And then on tenor sax is a really great musician, also AJ Kluth. I think kind of an under the radars. AJ is another one that, although he's been in town for a little longer, moved to town I think a couple years ago, and does some teaching and does some playing, and he's just another great musician that can really play and understand how this music today can be played. And he's a great soloist and brings a really hip kind of like unique sound to this area, because he came from outside of this area that I really liked in this music. And then on baritone sax and bass clarinet, because the thing about that book is there was another one. When I first put it together, Chris Carlick was really the only player in town that could really play modern jazz music, improvise at a high level, and play baritone saxophone and bass clarinet. And so, Betty Jean Quimby was another baritone saxophonist that was an equal bass clarinetist. And so, for me, that bass clarinet sound is so important to the sound of the group, that it was really important for me to find a baritone saxophonist that can get a great baritone sax sound and a great bass clarinet sound. And so, that's why I choose the musicians that I do. And there are actually probably a couple people on each instrument that I could call and this band would really fly today. But these are musicians that, I have relationships with and have known for years, and why I ended up calling them.
Yeah, it's such a blessing to have such a cohort of really fine players in town now, and
Yeah.
that that have emerged pretty much concurrently with my moving to this community. You talked
Hmm.
about Betty Jean having a great sound, and the record, which will be coming out at the end of March or early April on
Hmm.
Hidden Cinema Records, that's Stephen
Yeah.
Philip Harvey's label, um, also has a great sound. That was
Mhm.
recorded
Thank you.
live in May at the Bop Stop. And as an old recording engineer, uh, throw some flowers at your engineer for that date. Who was the engineer?
Oh yeah. I mean, so Ian Anderson, who's been a good friend of mine for several years now, is also teaches with me at one of the satellite Kent State schools at the Stark campus, where is housed the music production program down there. And so Ian is one of the uh, directors of that music tech program down there at the Kent Stark campus. And Ian has, honestly, such extensive experience. Somebody who has been around everywhere, from Boston to Nashville, now back here again, where he's from Northeast Ohio, but doing stuff at Berkeley and Boston, and having worked for years in Nashville, and now being up here. His engineering resume is actually fairly deep and diverse. That's the thing. You know, I, People need to understand is that if you want it to sound good, you have to get the right musicians. Yeah, and then of course, I mean, hopefully, I'm doing an okay writing good. There's so many things that go into the music being deep, but like from a recording standpoint, you can't just have any engineer, right? You know, you have to have an engineer that first and foremost, understands jazz music. But what does that mean? Like, if you understand the whole historical context of jazz from an aural soundscape standpoint, Blue Note records versus, everything up to how jazz is recorded today, you need to have somebody understand that, let alone if it has rock influences, if it has funk influences, if it has this influence, that influence. So like having an engineer that has deep roots in many, many things is not easy to find. Like you can have an engineer that's a great rock engineer that has recorded some jazz, but you know that that's not going to really work with what we're trying to find. And so that's why Ian is, really genius at what he does, is that his roots go so deep in many different ways that he can record anything, and why I love using him. He's done my last three, records now. And so and he understands how to record live. So that's, you add all that together, then you're getting what you need, because recording live, as I know you understand, John, is like more than just throwing a couple microphones down. Like you have to really understand the room, what mics are going to work in the room, how to place them, the type of separation you need, this and that, so that when you actually go to mix it, you could actually do a little bit with it if you want to, because that's the hard thing about doing a studio record versus a live record, is how much do you have to work with after the fact. And of course the musicians are going to play it this or that, but we all understand when you're mixing a record, there are certain things that you just are going to want to kind of experiment with, tweak a little bit, do this with, do that with. And so Ian did such a brilliant job recording it live that we were able to get the sounds we were able to get for the release.
Yeah, the sound is very clear. It's very present. It's very immediate. This is a band with some muscle behind it. You mentioned having Barry on the bottom and a very assertive trumpet on the top. So that gives the band a lot of depth and a lot of texture, which
Mm,
comes out very well on this recording. So tell the
mm,
people
thank
when it becomes available where they can get this recording entitled Red Rhinoceros.
Awesome. Thank you. So the official release date is March 27th, and it'll pretty much be on all streaming services, online streaming services. And um, if you want hard copies, come to one of my upcoming gigs because I'll have hard copies of usually multiple of my records there, but I will have CDs of the new Red Rhinoceros record, and
Will
I
there be
will make
vinyl?
not vinyl. So this one I just have CDs right now. I'm hoping to do vinyl at some point, but the initial release I just have the hard copies are CDs. And the other thing I want to mention is that, and this is, for me, it's kind of a big deal, is that there's actually going to be two versions of the digital release. There's going to be the stereo release, and there's going to be an Atmos digital release. And so that's kind of a big thing, especially in the jazz world. So the other thing about Ian Anderson that's really cool is he has the ability to create Atmos of audio versions of the record, and which is for people that don't know what Atmos is, it's been around for a minute, but it's still not a big thing in the audio world. Is it's basically surround sound for audio recordings. And so if you have a surround system at home that is set up for Atmos, I would download the digital Atmos version of it, and you will get you'll be able to sit in the middle of the room and hear it. Like you're literally in the a club listening to it live. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's great. But live is always the best way to listen to the music. So
Yes,
tell the people about the release concert at Kent in April.
absolutely. Yeah. I was thinking about because this group doesn't necessarily perform a ton these days. I mean, I have so many working projects at the moment that usually I'll pull this group out every now and then and kind of just for certain situations play with it. So we're not playing a ton. So I will say if you want to hear Red Rhinoceros live, coming up, this is one of the only live performances we have with this group. So this would be a good one to come see. And I was trying to figure out where to do it, and I wanted to do it at a different space that I thought would be cool and integrate it into things that I'm doing at Kent State. So we're doing it at the university. And quite honestly, this allowed me to do it as a free event. The other thing I was trying to find a way to do is to do it in a way that would be free and open to the public. And so we're actually kind of doing a multi-tiered event. We're doing an open rehearsal / kind of clinic masterclass at 6 o'clock. And I'll give all the information where in a second, but we're doing kind of an open rehearsal masterclass for Kent State students and some high school students, but that is also open and free to the public. And then the concert itself, we're going to start playing at 7:30, and we're just basically going to play the record live. And we're doing it at a really interesting space called the Design Innovation Hub at Kent State University. And the Design Innovation Hub is really a space created for collaboration amongst all fields. I actually co-taught one of the first classes taught at this newer space a few years ago. And it's really beautiful. And they have an auditorium in there with theater seating that's really cool that I'm really excited to perform there. So it's at Kent State University in the Design Innovation Hub's auditorium. We're doing a masterclass open rehearsal at 6 and a concert at 7:30, and it is all open and free to the public.
The date is Friday, April 3rd. The band is Bobby Selvaggio's Red Rhinoceros octet. Long may the Red Rhinos run. Bobby, thank you for doing this today.
John, thank you so much. I always appreciate you getting together and helping the scene as a whole. You've been just a beautiful person to have around here. So thank you.
Oh, man, thank you.